Hi folks, this is Dr. Rob Cywes. I am the Carb Addiction Doc, and today we're going into the second part of our little mini-series of Carbohydrate Addiction Revisited. And in this episode, I'm hopefully going to blow your mind a little bit, because more and more over the last few years, people are coming to at least play with the concept of carbohydrate addiction and juxtapose it from diets. And I like to think that we've contributed significantly to that, but everybody out there says, oh, yes, I've always thought that, I've always known that. BS. It's an evolution in that process. However, let me expand and blow your mind a little bit. Let's talk about what addiction is. Addiction is a dysfunctional response to emotional tension when a person has a comprehensively deficient emotion management system. So the starting point of addiction is a whole bunch of undealt with stress, anxiety, depression, anger, fear, frustration, boredom, and pleasure, collectively called emotional tension. And all human beings develop a unique set of tools, set of skills that they use to activate the endorphin system to dissipate emotional tension. And there really are two separate ways in which we do this. There's either an instant gratification way, where there's an upfront reward when you do something or consume something that activates the endorphin system in a short-lived but very powerful way, the spike. You smoke a cigarette, the nicotine goes to your brain, you get that instant tranquility, instant relief, but it's short-lived. And on the back end, there's negativity, harm, guilt, erosion of self-esteem and self-confidence, and repression of dealing with the issues that caused the emotional tension in the first place. So that's a instant gratification system that's dysfunctional. Now, if you smoke a cigar once a week or once every month, a very healthy use of an instant gratification system, especially if you have a broad subset of effort-based emotion management. We'll talk about that. So we've got effort-based emotion management systems, which are the healthy way to deal with stuff. However, when it comes to instant gratification, they can be used, they can be abused, and they can be addicted to. And there are two different forms of instant gratification. The first obvious form that is most prevalent in our world right now is substance addiction. Whether it's nicotine, whether it's vaping or smoking, whether it's alcohol, whether it's heroin, crystal meth, crack cocaine, and into that, and I think the world more and more, a subset of the world more and more, is coming to understand that carbohydrates are highly addictive, highly endorphin activating substances that as soon as they enter the bloodstream, they go to your brain and give you the same sense of tranquility as nicotine, as heroin, as opium does, without clouding your mentation, without clouding your judgment. Nicotine and carbohydrates don't cloud your judgment like all those other drugs, including alcohol, does. And therefore, you can insert them into part of your workday and still be functional. And that's challenging. That's dangerous. What was interesting is that George Bush Jr., who's a self-acknowledged alcoholic and has done some great work in helping with addiction, couldn't be president if he was still drinking, because it clouds judgment. And you can't have a sitting president, or at least you shouldn't have a sitting president who's an alcoholic. However, what's interesting is Barack Obama smoked. Barack Obama was a closet smoker and probably still is, and continued to be throughout his pregnancy, and was challenged on it on multiple occasions. But that was an untouched embarrassment. But it didn't cloud his judgment. And therefore, you could use nicotine in that way. I'm not going to talk about Bill Clinton and his little problem with blue dresses and other things. We'll leave that one to another day. That's kind of more the Tiger Woods type of thing. But the point is that carbohydrates, and certainly Donald Trump had a carbohydrate addiction. Yeah, Donald Trump had a carbohydrate addiction. But both Donald Trump and Barack Obama were able to function absolutely fine Because carbohydrates and nicotine, at least as drugs, don't cloud your judgment. They made Donald Trump severely obese. Smoking, not a good thing for Barack Obama. Both were addicts, both were highly functional. So it's not that it leads to an incapacity to do your job, and that's what makes them so dangerous. All these kids that are vaping at high school, yeah, some of them, and it's funny talking to educators, they have these anxiety attacks where every day a child in high school has to be taken away by an ambulance because they're having this panic attack, this anxiety attack because they've overdone the vaping. Oh, that's so sad. Nobody's talking about it. Talk to an educator about it. Talk to a high school or a middle school educator. They know what I'm talking about. And if you are an educator, by the way, please leave comments on that. Because you're seeing this more and more, and we have to shine a light on it. Because sure as hell, the tobacco companies have put out that light. It's a dark zone. Vaping is healthy. Vaping is fine. They've conned us again. And we're victims again. First with smoking, now with vaping. Same company. Be that as may, that's a little soapbox for me. So, carbohydrates are a highly addictive drug, a highly addictive substance. They fall in the instant gratification, substance abuse category. But when it comes to addiction, there are two separate instant gratification mechanisms. The first one is clearly substance addiction. Your heroines, your crystal meths, your crack cocaines, your nicotines, your carbohydrates, your alcohols. But separate to that, there's something called process addiction. And all these people, oh, addiction, they don't understand the process addiction. Process addiction is also a form of instant gratification with a reward up front. What's process addiction? Process addiction is things like gambling, gaming, and under COVID, a lot of kids started gaming excessively with their vape and their M&Ms next to them, triple addiction. But gambling, gaming, sex, pornography, cutting, when these young kids cut themselves, and that becomes an addiction, it's causing pain for pleasure. Very dysfunctional way to live. Alleviates anxiety, but it's not a healthy way to be. So we've got process addiction and we've got substance addiction. And what's interesting about carbohydrate addiction, and this is something that most people haven't even thought about, let alone know, is that as far as I'm aware, and I'd love for people to come up with, help me out here, because for years now, I've worked in this space and I've racked my brains and I haven't found anything else like carbohydrate addiction, because carbohydrate addiction is unique in that it has a massive footprint in substance addiction, but it also has a massive footprint in process addiction. You see, if a little stick called Juul didn't contain nicotine, none of the kids would vape as regularly as they do. If a cigarette didn't contain nicotine, if a beverage didn't contain alcohol, the alcoholic wouldn't be drinking it. The smoker wouldn't be smoking a cigarette that didn't contain nicotine. So those are pure substance addictions. And clearly the substance addiction is sugar. Sugar and starch, glucose, galactose, fructose entering your bloodstream, going to your brain, activating that endorphin system. But there's an equally impactful process addiction. It's actually two addictions. The first one is snacking. And folks, a snack is always an emotional event. A snack is never, ever a nutritional event. But guess what? I didn't just snack. That was not a snack. And here's why. You see, a snack is a process addiction because most often, snacks are carbohydrate based. It's your M&Ms, it's your chocolates, it's your pretzels, it's your chips. But if you're snacking on peanuts, if you're snacking on cheese, if you're snacking on pepperoni or pork rinds, a little bit here, a little bit there, by the end of the day, it's a whole bag. No different than smoking, except if a cigarette didn't contain nicotine, people wouldn't do it. But nobody smokes 20 cigarettes at one time. It's a cigarette here, a cigarette there, for throughout the day emotional relief, emotional management. So a snack is always an emotional event. And a snack, by definition, is calories that you put in your face for your head. Well, this cup of coffee is a bridge. It's coffee. It's got no calories in it. So it's something that gives me that degree of emotional relief as a processed substance, but it causes me no harm. Now out there is going to, oh, coffee does this, coffee does that. BS. Nobody has ever died of Diet Coke toxicity or of coffee toxicity. So all you keto evangelists, you may not like coffee, it may not sit well with you, but that's a choice. It is not a toxic product. And I will stand by that, particularly because that used to be a bag of M&Ms when I was 300 pounds. So take your perfectionism. Ooh, I used to have all things to say when I was stressed out and anxious and uptight and I wasn't in control of my emotions. You know what? If you want to comment about my coffee, go ahead. Go ahead. Make comments about my coffee. My coffee's not perfect. It's not perfect at all, but it's perfect for me. Don't get between me and my coffee. But be that as it may, my coffee's a bridge. It isn't a snack. So a snack is always an emotional event. And here's the bizarre part. Most people, well, let me ask you this question. When should you eat? When should you eat? What should be the driving force behind you eating? Why do people tell you, oh, this is the time you should eat? And I bet you that you're probably saying to yourself, the driving force behind the need to eat should be hunger. When I'm hungry, I need to eat. And that is a massive keto diet mistake. Because fat people are always hungry, just like the smoker is always looking for a cigarette. And if I'm eating whenever I'm hungry, I'm snacking all day long, and a snack is always a process addiction. Hunger no longer represents nutritional requirement. Hunger represents an emotional need. And hunger and snack are exactly the same as I need a cigarette, I need some nicotine. No different. Hunger is a word that is associated now with emotional relief, not with nutritional requirement, because of this tsunami of food in our world. You can't turn around, you can't go anywhere where food isn't available in abundance, or at least drugs, carbohydrates. Most of you are sitting right now within 50 yards of an abundance of food. So don't tell me that your hunger is driven by nutritional requirement. And in fact, as you'll hear me say in other videos, if you're doing a Jason Fung extended intermittent fast of 3 to 5 days, after 24, 36 hours, your hunger goes away. How can that be a nutritional driving force when you're not eating, when you're basically fasting or starving yourself? You're not hungry. If hunger was a nutritional driving force, then surely the longer you go without eating, the more hungry you should get. But throughout the day, the fat person's hungry. Oh, I'm hungry. My stomach's growling. I need to eat. I worked hard. I was so hungry. Yeah, your blood sugar levels may be dropping because you're so carbohydrate dominant that your blood sugars are seesawing up. And every time your blood sugars drop, there's a signal of hunger. Oh, I'm hungry. And you eat and you can't get yourself out of that cycle. That's an addiction cycle. That's a physiologic addiction and a mental addiction. But hunger is an emotion event, not a nutrition event. So hunger is a process addiction that comes along with carbohydrates, starts with carbohydrates, but isn't always perseverate as that. It could be pepperoni and cheese for all those carnivores out there. Still an addiction. And you can't break an addiction if you're still doing it. You cannot break a habit that you're still doing. And then the third part of carbohydrate addiction, which is another process addiction, is called Rottweiler syndrome. What the hell is Rottweiler syndrome? These are all words I've made up. So there's nobody else out there talking about it because I made these up. I made up the word bridge. I made up the word Rottweiler syndrome. If you've ever watched a Rottweiler eating breakfast, no matter how much food you put in front of that Rottweiler, it aggressively attacks that food and it'll lie there and be stuffed because it's overeaten. And in the modern era, we human beings over the last 50 years, particularly here in America, but I think everywhere else in the world where there's an abundance of food, we've progressively increased our portion sizes so they're massive. If any of you Americans have ever been to Europe and you go to some upscale restaurant where they serve a kiddie's portion done by an interior decorator, this nouveau cuisine, that costs an arm and a leg, and you get all angry at them for underfeeding you. Dudes, that's a normal portion. And it's usually really cool and very tasty and most often healthy food. But we in this country got all angry because they didn't feed us this massive amount of food that as a Rottweiler you just dig into. And when you eat that pathetically small amount of food, you're still hungry because you haven't stuffed yourself. Rottweiler syndrome is very similar to cutting. Cutting is where you hurt yourself for pleasure in a bizarre, distorted way. Overeating to the point that you stuffed, to the point that, oh my God, I can't eat anymore. That's hurting yourself. That's feeling overfull for that dysfunctional, distorted emotional thing. Your body doesn't need that amount of food. Your brain does. And Rottweiler syndrome is a process addiction that defies normal biologic satiety signals that should come from saturated fat. And the funny thing is, what people do is they eat this huge pile of food. Oh, it's healthy food. It's a steak and a salad or a steak and some vegetables. Oh, I'm full. I can't eat anymore. And 2 minutes later, they sit in front of the TV with a bag of chips or a bag of pretzels or popcorn, or they're sitting there having some cheesecake or ice cream. They're full. That dessert is not there for the nutritional value. You're already stuffed from food. You've already overeaten food. Now you're doing crystal meth to get high. It has nothing to do with nutrition. That is a process addiction. And if you're stuffing yourself with carbohydrates as a snack in front of the TV right after dinner, you're fulfilling the substance addiction, carbohydrates, you're fulfilling the snacking process addiction, and you're eating the Rottweiler out of house and home. In our practice, we understand all three of those components of addiction management. If you just deal with carbohydrates, but you eat whenever you're hungry, you're not fixing the problem. You're just massaging it a little bit. You're going from smoking cigarettes to vaping, thinking you're going to quit. Bullshit. That's what the tobacco companies tell you to sell you vape. Well, when a dietitian says, oh, eat when you're hungry, you're just keeping the addiction going. Addiction management requires the treatment of all three. It requires removal and replacement of those behaviors with more functional behaviors. So one of the things that the dietary people love to tell you is, oh, carbohydrates are so bad for you, they're so unhealthy for you. Oh, and they're addictive. So what they do is they completely, very quickly, here's your sheet of paper, here's your keto diet, and you're going to go on food that doesn't contain carbohydrates. They do it all in one day. In the next episode, we're going to talk about eating the elephant a little bit. So the next in this mini-series is so important. But in the meantime, what diets do is they deprive you of your carbohydrates and they replace them with real food. Sure, if you give up carbohydrates, which is typically about 80% of an obese or diabetic, type 2 diabetic person's diet in terms of calories, if you give them up all in one day and you replace them with real food, from a nutritional perspective, you may have made a change. Because when you remove carbohydrates, you leave a massive nutritional void. But what very, very few people understand, let alone pay attention to, is when you remove carbohydrates from an obese and metabolically challenged or a diabetic person's life, you leave an even more massive emotion management hole. And if you're so fixated on the nutritional replacement, fine, you can eat healthy food, you can eat a ketogenic diet, low-carb, high-fat diet on good days. But when life throws you that curveball, when life throws you that emotional curveball, how the hell are you going to take care of it? Because if I look in your emotion management toolkit, you've got carbohydrates, snacks, and Rottweilers, and cobwebs. So when life throws that curveball at you and you're not eating carbohydrates, how are you going to deal with it? Of course you're going to relapse. And if you're like everybody else on a diet, oh, this diet didn't work, keto didn't work for me, this thing didn't work for me. So what we do in diets is we go from diet to diet to diet, and we're experts at failing weight loss programs. Because we don't understand it as an addiction problem. We see it from a caloric perspective, and we see it from a control perspective. And we see it from an obesity causes harm perspective. All totally erroneous, all totally setups for failure. Understand the fundamentals of carbohydrate addiction. Watch more videos on this channel and watch this mini-series. And then when you buy into that, when you have the ownership of, wow, I didn't understand it that way, and I need this insight, I need this help, I need the support, set up a visit with us. Text 561-517-0642, email us, but set up a visit with me, with Jane, our dietitian. But approach this from a fundamental emotion management perspective. And you'll struggle. You'll trip up. You won't be very good to start with, but you'll get better and better and better the more humble you are about your mistakes. And eventually, you'll get this for the rest of your life. Because addiction management is not about food or nutrition or weight. Addiction management is about behavior and relationships. Addiction management is about behavior and relationships. And there is no endpoint to changing behavior and relationships. It's something you get to do better and better every day until about 10 minutes after you're dead. Give us a shout if we can help. I hope this begins to get some insights. I'm going to clarify it for you. We can do that when we talk with you, because our talk with you will be unique to your situation. This is more a global discussion. But if this resonates, listen to this again and again and make sure that you understand what we talked about. And in the next video, we're going to give you some starter questions to ask of yourself to define the problem for yourself. Take care. I am the Carb Addiction Doc.